I'd like to say good morning to each one of you. This team for his prayer this morning, his words on behalf of his nation, and I appreciate that. I also want to say happy Indigenous Peoples Day to everyone out there. I hope you're all enjoying the day. And I'm going to say a little bit in my own language. I'm a proud member of the Ho-Chunk Nation of Wisconsin. I'd like to say good morning. I greet each one of you with good feelings. Ho-Chunk Rajara Hinukajaide Hingaide. Unchi Kikara Chija Wang Hoje. My Ho-Chunk spirit name is Hinukajaide, and it means a woman to be seen, and I'm a proud member of the I've been asked to mention the land acknowledgement this morning, and I'm going to do that. There's a heritage marker that sits on the University of Wisconsin-Madison campus. It's titled Our Shared Future, and this is what it says. The University of Wisconsin-Madison occupies ancestral Ho-Chunk land, a place their nation has called Dejok since time immemorial. In an 1832 treaty, the Ho-Chunk were forced to cede this territory. Decades of ethnic cleansing followed when both the federal and state government repeatedly, but unsuccessfully, sought to forcibly remove the Ho-Chunk from Wisconsin. This history of colonization informs our shared future of collaboration and innovation. Today, University of Wisconsin-Madison respects the inherent sovereignty of the Ho-Chunk Nation, along with the other 11 First Nations of Wisconsin. And that concludes my report. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Waini Ginapui. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle, so much for that. Good morning. This is Claire Bjork from Earth Partnership with a few notes on using WebEx during the webinar. First, I'd like to point out the event info tab at the top of your screen, which has the phone call-in information in case you have need of that audio option during the session. All attendees will be muted and have their videos off during the session, but you can still communicate using the chat and Q&A features on the right-hand panel. Chat messages can be sent to the entire group by selecting everyone in the drop-down menu. Please go ahead right now and enter your name, organization, and location in the chat so that we can all get a sense of where we're joining from today. We will be disabling the chat for attendees at the beginning of Dr. Bowman's presentation, but you can ask questions at any time using the Q&A feature. These questions will not go to the entire group, but will only be seen by the host and panelists. This is how you can ask questions of Dr. Bowman during and after the presentation. Just go ahead and submit your question at any point, but we will wait to address questions until the Q&A section. For content questions, please do add your name and organization so we can note when sharing who the questions are coming from. Finally, you can also use the Q&A to get help if you're experiencing technical issues. We'd like to send a special thank you to Sean and Kevin from Do It Tech Support, who are with us today to answer technical questions and who have helped tremendously with setup for this event. Well, thanks for putting your information in the chat. Keep using the Q&A feature throughout the session. And with that, I'd like to pass the mic to Cheryl Bauer-Armstrong.
Thank you, Claire. Cheryl Bauer-Armstrong, the director of the Earth Partnership Program. And with pleasure, I welcome you all to our first webinar in a series geared to non-Indigenous educators and researchers interested in collaborating with Indigenous communities. We are thrilled to see such a tremendous response with over 600 people registered for this event. This indicates that there is a strong interest from the university community and others to improve research and education relationships that honor tribal sovereignty. And happy Indigenous Peoples Day. We actually scheduled this event on this day to honor Native Indigenous Americans as we seek ways to change the narratives of the past. Historically, university outreach to and research in Indigenous communities have been problematic, involving hierarchical imposition of methods or exploitation of extracted knowledge. In an effort to reimagine a tribal university partnership based on mutual respect, and shared interest, Earth Partnership Indigenous Arts and Sciences began in 2011. Thank you for joining our efforts. Before we begin, I'd like to offer a deep and appreciative thank you to our tribal partners who co-developed this program and are collaborating to co-create a sustainable model for indigenized environmental science education. Partners include Bad River Nation with principal investigators Naomi Tillison and Stephanie Julian, Lac du Flambeau Nation with principal investigators Brian Gochi and Larry Wawanoritz, and Ho-Chunk Nation with principal investigator Michelle Cloud, and Red Cliff with principal investigator Jared Blanche. Secondly, I'd like to convey a thank you to the Earth Partnership staff who are dedicated to this effort. Claire Bork, Rachel Byington, Jessie Conaway, who's also affiliated with the Nelson Institute, Misty Jackson, and Maria Moreno. Thank you, team. Thank you, friends. Third, I need to acknowledge our sponsors and funders. Currently, Indigenous Arts and Sciences, or we say IAS, is funded by the Spencer Foundation, National Science Foundation, USDA Forest Service, USDA, National Institute of Food and Agriculture, New Beginnings for Native Students, and the UW School of Education. Previous funds were awarded by the Baldwin Wisconsin Idea Endowment, our first delving into Indigenous Arts and Sciences, US EPA, Wisconsin Sea Grant, NOAA BWET, and Wisconsin ESA Improving Teacher Quality Program. I especially want to give a thank you to Dr. Paul Robbins, Dean of the Nelson Institute for Environmental Studies, for his support and commitment to Earth Partnership and his leadership changing Native Nation university relationships. Lastly, thanks to our home base on the UW-Madison campus, the Department of Planning and Landscape Architecture, for taking Earth Partnership under its wing. Without further ado, I am pleased to introduce our first featured speaker and colleague, Dr. Nicole Bowman. Dr. Bowman, it's an absolute joy to share this together.
Kolomosi ni Deshinzi, Wichiwin Miu Kanewak, Ninon GIE, Shana, Wisconsin. Ni Alagomatit, Niwikian, Nishi Kishalamokwe, Ni Mubausa Wakana, Ni Joseph. I just provided you a traditional greeting in Lenape language, which is otherwise the colonized word is Delaware Indians. I am Delaware, Lenape, and Mohican, and Polish on my mother's side. And I just, like our elder, Richard and Michelle, and I'm sure there are other traditional Native people on here, we've been preparing for a long time. My colleagues in Earth Partnerships and on the Spencer Project, thank you for bringing us here. And we've taken a lot of time because we realize that this is a journey. This is part of Wichiwinu Kanewak, my spirit name, which as an elementary ed teacher, I didn't think that I would be providing this type of training and leadership on and off UW campus. I'd like to thank Dr. Bell and Dr. Good at WCER for always supporting my passion and my dreams and my academic stand-up once in a while. And I know that Nasheen, Dr. Carolee Dodge Francis, my big sister, Dr. King, and Dr. Patty Lowe are on here. I hope I'm making you proud. They're on my advisory group and have supported me for many, many years. And my lead and wet colleagues. So all of you who are here, thank you for coming. I've asked the ancestors, spent a lot of time with them over the weekend and this morning before the thunderstorms hit. And I said, if Papa Takwik, if the thunder beings want the lights off, they'll be off. I'll just call back in on my cell phone. So Kwingali Monomwa, which means it's so good to see you. Happy you're here. We want you to party like it's 1491, and I'm a little bit country, a little bit rock and roll, and a little bit res, which I'm proudly happy to say that in 2015 I graduated from UW-Madison with my PhD in ELPA, and I'm sort of a blue-collar scholar. And I am so pleased that there are so many folks who are interested, and this isn't going to be one and done. I'd like to thank our tribes who are teaching me every day that no matter what project we're on, I'm learning new things, and this is a very tribally centered and traditionally centered project. One of the first teachings I was given, and I think it's important today, is our medicine wheel. And that's how our, we can go to the next slide. That's how our presentation is divided into. I use the medicine wheel for everything. I've been receiving those teachings for decades, and hopefully I do it justice. And so we have 4 colors that are represented on our medicine wheel, and they represent a lot of things besides just dividing our presentation up. They are for the 4 directions. They are for the 4 races of humankind. And so I come to you as a way to Nialagomati, to be in good relations and to be connected with you, in hopes that you take some of this, that both your spirit and your frontal lobes, your gray matter, take some things. We shouldn't limit ourselves to just a physical experience, but for those of you who are theorists and methodologists, we have lots. And I'll be mentioning a few of them, as well as the early handouts that the Earth Partnerships team gave. Thank you so much. So the 4 sections are good relations, and that's going to be getting to know us and our Spencer project. The southern door is, why do we need this work? What are some Indigenous and tribal critical theories? The western door is about doing good work and being in action. The western door is sort of where some of you might feel today. Our elders teach us things aren't good or bad. They just are. Everything is a teacher. And when you're in the western door, sometimes you can't see what's in front of you, or don't know what's waiting to come to life in you. And hopefully today is that day for you, but you have to rely on your faith and your experience, praxis, as well as what you've learned in school or the institution that you're at or the university. And then northern door is white because it is wisdom. It is the way of our elders. And we'll just be talking there about next steps and some takeaways. So next slide, please. Just a quick about getting to know us. If you didn't read the handout, this is the short version. Born out of failure, Cheryl and I created the Spencer grant proposal. And feeling down, my sister in solidarity said, hey, let's write this, Nikki. We're going to get this. This is a good idea. And doing this nation to nation work and having tribal nations take part in building their research capacity. We were doing a lot of programming. I believe we were doing a lot of research. And I just happened to have a nation to nation model to sort of say, hey, you've been doing this great work for decades, like, let's do this. And I guess Spencer liked it too. So we are working together to co-develop a tribally driven participatory research partnership model in the context of informal science. In the Spencer webinar series, we have a tribal side where we internally work to build tribal research capacity. We talk about how do you do research, what's important to the community to do research, how do we have a local, it might be an elder team, cultural knowledge keepers. It might be as informal as that to a tribal IRB like the Menominee Nation and the Ho-Chunk Nation have, and we learned from them on September 22nd. And I believe those are going to be posted on our Earth Partnership Spencer project area of the website. And just like today's webinar will be, so don't worry if you missed part of it or if you want to rewatch it. The other half, though, is how do we develop research partnerships and capacities with our non-tribal academic partners? And that's all of you on today's webinar, most of you. So next slide, please. We felt we had to build on both sides. So the Bad River Nation, Ho-Chunk Nation, Lecta Flambeau Nation, Red Cliff Nation are the Native nations who are leading the way and who have been leading the way. I heard early, I really liked when our elder Richard, when he explained his prayer. I only know a few Ojibwe words, but the ones I did, I tried to nod. So thank you for taking the time and being so thoughtful even before you got on today, Elder. When he said, put your tobacco down and leave it the way it was. Don't do anything with it unless you ask permission and you were given permission. That's a big responsibility, and there's a lot of teachings behind that, both for Ojibwe and Lenape and in our other tribal nations. But I thought very hard about this, and one of the things is when we work with our Native nations, we sit in a circle. It's not top down. It's very much sitting around I call it an academic lodge. I don't know what else to call it, but we listen to each other and we all contribute something, and we make sure that we're caregivers, caretakers, not owners. We realize in the Western sense, and you're going to hear me talking about both, that we have to have IRB, human subjects, cultural protections, and those protocols, things to record and to not record, honoring a no when a no happens, and not feeling so upset about that. And today is about just an overview because there's too many of you, but as we follow up and go along, we're hopefully going to be having some really meaningful discussions, and it won't be just sit and get, because that's where the fun and that's where the magic happens, is when we get to start interacting as humans in the context of practice that we're in. All right, next slide. Let's see. So in the Eastern Door, we have 4 questions. We want to ask, as researchers, evaluators, in my home, I should have said this earlier, is in Wisconsin Center for Education Research on West Johnson Street. Sorry, I haven't been there. None of us have in a while. And I am a scientist and an evaluator over there. I work under the WEC, Wisconsin Evaluation Collaborative, and wherever else Dr. Good sends me. That's my supervisor. So we want to have reciprocal relations. We don't want to take. You'll notice that there are very few American Indian faculty, scholars, academic staff, or whatever labels Western institutions give us that have some working knowledge about policy and governance or practice or traditions and things like that. So we get asked to do a lot. And part of reciprocal relations is being able to understand how big that ask is and the emotional and spiritual and practical burden that it carries for us. And so we want to make sure that we are being reciprocal. We're not asking too much and wearing out our welcome. We are invited in. That would include me when I go to Native communities. I don't just assume that I am automatically, come on in. And we're remembered by the moccasin steps that we leave, right? And so we have to make sure that we think about our relationships, not only in the short term, but the long term. And I'm going to teach you today how to think about it in the pre-contact to the early contact to the contemporary spaces. We want to do no harm. And so as we came up with the questions, you can see here in the 4 doorways, what's the history and current use of research in each community? What are the support and barriers for conducting research in the community? Based on what the partnership has learned, how do we refine any model that we bring so that it makes sense for the tribal communities that we're working in? And it might mean sort of a different iteration of the model. And the model is intended to be flexible. Think of grass or think of trees. They're rooted in things, but they dance and they sing and they make their own movement to whatever it is that they need. And then question 4 is the North, drawing from our tribally driven participatory research, what have we learned and how do we further this work? Next slide. Thank you. We have a vision. We have a passion. It's beyond vision. It's a passionate vision. We want to go beyond doing no harm to how do we plant seeds for future growth to be regenerative, restorative, have sustainable pathways. And that's not just because I'm sitting in the Green Thumb Earth Partnership, in the earth-loving, Kukana-Aki-loving, Mother Earth-loving Earth Partnership. It's really the way that we want to invest in each other as humans and in other ways. And so we would like to see our nation-to-nation model help redefine academic and tribal research partnerships. And that could be from policy to practice to what you're using in your syllabus to how you design things, how you do procurement, how you do information sharing, data governance, who owns the data, all of those things, which we're not going to cover in any depth today, but I will give you an overview and lots of articles to follow up on. We want to be able to support, to be in service to tribal nations and Indigenous communities because we have many Indigenous communities off reserve, urban Indigenous communities and pockets of rural Indigenous communities, not just in Wisconsin, but throughout the United States and North America, so that they can lead or co-lead their own efforts. Our job is to provide support. Our job as an academic partner is to be quiet and to listen, is to use that Western construct of observation and listening, which if you use content or context analysis, if there's an hour and we're all together, it's very rare that the Native people get to speak for 50 minutes of that hour. It's usually the other way around. Next slide. So there's going to be some theory, method, some real practical stuff that you'll hear sprinkled out throughout here. We eventually are turning back the chat back on in a little while, so don't worry. Write on Post-it notes if you have questions, so remember to type them in the chat if you have it. So we're in the southern door right now, for those of you who are keeping track and like that structure. Why this? Why now? Why do we need to talk about origin stories? Origin stories are so important. We have to talk about how important origin stories are as partners, organizations, and systems. We have to know origin stories so we don't do harm knowingly or unknowingly. The theory, the methods, the design, the policy, the governance, staffing patterns, publications, keynotes, awards, partnerships and initiatives, budgets, these all have contemporary impacts. For example, we all know about saving the earth, sustainable development goals. That's, why are we here? A lot of times when I work on projects, when I work on earth justice projects, for instance, there's a lot of non-native folks, non-BIPOC folks that want to save the planet. And I always say, why did we get here first? That's where wisdom is, not more information, not more publications. We have to have real discussions about what got us here. Conquest, colonization, capitalism, consumerism, individualism. There's a whole bunch of things. But we have to start with the concept of origin stories. And that also begins in your mind. What are the cognitive constructs and the social constructs you carry around? Because wherever you go, there you are. So if you look at your syllabi, if you look at the books you read, and I'm saying read not the cover, look at the back. How many of them come from Native scholars? And I want to impress upon you that there are many of us out here that carry Western scholarship titles and doctorates and experiences and things like that. But we are also traditional people, and for me, I'm traditional first, and that's why I'm trying to share some of the teachings, traditional teachings, and how they have a contemporary meaning in these Western contexts that we practice in. So we have to think about colonization is something that's common of Indigenous people worldwide. The doctrine of discovery, unmasking the domination code, is the short version, the Cliff Notes version, if you will. 38+2 is the organization that publishes that. That changed my scholarship. And in 1 hour, they go through about 525 years, including right up to, the U.S. Constitution and some of the things going on with the pipelines and the mines and the things that we see in the news, some more regularly in the mainstream news and some less regularly. We have to think about, we had a land recognition because the land I'm on here is that of the Menominee. The land UW-Madison is on is that of the Ho-Chunk. And even though you might not have done it and conquered and took and stole that land, you're benefiting from being on it. And it's important that you know that origin story. It's important because it communicates that we have value. And it also is a place of common language and common understanding that we can come to so we can create new understanding, so we can unlearn things that K-12 and higher ed have taught us. If Act 31 isn't the only way that we make contributions. I can guarantee you any Native American that is on this webinar today could walk into any organization, any sector, any discipline and contribute something. They really could. And I'm saying from a traditional standpoint, if they're allowed to share that, and that's a responsibility, but also we know where the literature is on the topics that you're working on. So I really implore you to look not only at origin stories, but do a self-reflection on what types of source material that you are using, because there is a lot out there. And we don't want to have to carry that whole burden. So I'm not saying contact everybody who's Native on here, because I don't want all of them yelling at me when we hang up this webinar. Oh, next slide, please. This is one contemporary example. If we look at the theory tree, I'm an evaluator for the most part, and we look at these 3 trees. What do you see? To me, the first thing that I saw was a tree without roots. And a tree without roots cannot live. But if we look at again, think of the documents you use in your professional and academic life. Are they mostly from white males and a couple white females and maybe a few token BIPOC folks? And I'm not trying to be offensive. I'm just trying to keep it real. We have to start thinking about whose viewpoints are we bringing forward in theory and method? This is very important. Even the way we think about owning things. We're caretakers of things, but there should be shared rights when we're talking about buckets of data, or the tribes should be able to be taking part in publications if they want to and if they've approved it. And there are a lot of more tribes that are putting policies and ordinances out there around that. If you haven't read Menominee Indians or Ho-Chunks, I would suggest you do that. If you are working with the Navajo Nation, good luck. It's going to take you at least 2 years and they still might say no. So there are a lot of systems. It's complexity theory, critical systems heuristics, if you like theory. When the systems have to talk to each other, it becomes very important that we have sustainable and good relations, but that we also understand how the systems and subsystems have to work together. Sometimes there's tension, sometimes there are gaps, and if you have a working knowledge and an understanding of this, you're going to be able to work with tribal nations and Indigenous people in a much more effective and efficient and culturally responsive manner. Next slide, please. So I really like us to think, what has changed? Has stuff really changed? You know, one of the biggest complaints when you share things or post things on social media is, oh, that happened so long ago. I beg to differ. The same things are happening. Treaty laws are not honored. You know, our treaties and our Indigenous rights as nations and as people get stomped on every day. I also want you to think about what's going on right now with White House memorandums, 2034 and 2037. They're talking about critical race theory and that intersectionality, systemic racism, positionality, racial humility, unconscious bias, all of these topics are under attack. And that's the work that I have done for decades, and I know many of you have done for decades. And some of you are just starting and you're interested in that. So I'm just saying, we have to be vigilant and we have to think about how we do our work differently. A blue collar scholar comment I always have is, if what you were doing, academia or non-natives or non-BIPOC, was working, we would have different outcomes. So as an evaluator, our longitudinal data would be different. We'd have more Native Americans graduating at higher rates. We would have smaller or no achievement gaps. I would get paid $1 on every dollar instead of my 48 cents worth, not my 2 cents worth, my 48 cents worth. So you have to really think about, if you think about it in a logic model, what do we have for inputs? What are we putting in there for inputs in terms of humans, budget, self-development, professional development, all along the line. So as we see outputs, outcomes, and impacts, we have to build it differently or it's not going to change. That's what this discussion today is, the start of. All right, next slide. So one of the ways we respond back, I know our WEC, Wisconsin Evaluation Collaborative within the Wisconsin Center for Ed Research has a statement talking about anti-racism. This one is from the American Ed Research Association. So I would strongly ask those of you to look to see, are you honoring Indigenous Peoples Day? Is it Columbus Day for you? Like, all of these things matter and they affect us every day in big and small ways. Next slide. This poem is too long to read right now and too small, so all my DataViz people, don't get mad at me, I realize. But I want us to think about learning, unlearning, and relearning. I would like to thank Dr. Hazel Simonette from the WEC and LEAD in clinics inside WEC and LEAD centers inside of WCER. She was part of the Howard University Evaluation Training Institute. There were 45 of us that got to be trained by her, and she's currently doing a culturally responsive equity and evaluation community of practice that just started this month with us. And we have to think about, when you're reading, when you are Native or BIPOC, you always are looking, Am I represented here? Is my voice heard or not? Are they focusing on us or not? How do they collect and identify data? Who's interpreting the data? Because I can guarantee if you have a pile of data and I have a pile of data, we're going to interpret it differently, just because of the lived knowledge and experience and expertise that I have with working with tribes and American Indian populations. And so I really want you to think about who's heard and who's not heard, who's published and not published. Are you calling something valid and reliable only because it's published? I mean, if I get a 7,000 word article, I got to spend 5,000 words just like setting the stage, you know what I mean, in the literature. We have so many structural inequities that we deal with. I mean, I could go on and on. When we're doing research with tribal nations, do you have a nation-to-nation interagency agreement? UW-Madison and University of Arizona are the only people who have tribal consultation agreements. I challenge you and I cheer for you, and I hope that you will put forward a way to operationalize that through your IRB, through your programming, however it is that you do it. Let's make it operational. Next slide. Multicultural validity, I just wanted to talk about this quickly. You have to be culturally responsive and inclusive in order to have validity, theoretical, experiential, consequential, and methodological. And I just would like to remind us that everything you know doesn't get published in a book. Books cannot argue back, is what one of my elders said. So we really need to start valuing culture and community context and lived experience equal to what we see in a book. Sometimes I've spent my whole life basically looking at books saying, how am I going to make this work? Next slide is about interpersonal validity, and that's Dr. Hazel Simonette. Interpersonal validity spotlights the agency of the evaluator or researcher, and it's a heartbeat of multicultural validity and relational validity. They represent the human systems dynamics, the who related infrastructure. And I would say no matter where you go, there you are. And I apologize to Dr. Simonette for being so fast. This could be a week or a semester long class in and of itself. That's why I keep going back. All right, Southern Door. A cultural framework. Here's one way, one Lenape way to frame things. When you're coming into a partnership, when you're developing programs, policies, when you're developing a report, how do you share strengths instead of just writing deficits? How do you affirm the lived experience of the people that you are studying or working with? Let's hope it's not studying anymore, that you're in support of and working in partnership with. What were the challenges in the Western Door, and what did you do to address those challenges to grow, refine, and make changes? And then what was the wisdom in the Northern Door? How do we start writing that down so we can replicate it? Bottom line is sovereignty and governance matter. What I hope you take from the slides so far, and the next slide, Maria, is that we are both about cultural, culture, language, community context, but we are also about sovereignty and governance. We are sovereign tribes. We have nation to nation equal status with the federal or international government. So the least we should be doing is coming correctly when we work with tribes and tribal organization. Otherwise, I always say it isn't just federal prison or a jailhouse that can institutionalize you. We can't be on those high moral horses. We have to remember that institutions can do it as well. Higher institutions of higher ed. And I get that's called academic and cultural humility. And I figure if somebody's telling me about it, that means they trust me enough to think that I'm actually going to listen and not be a blockhead, to use a Charlie Brown phrase. So do not remove things from us. Do not think you have right to access and claiming what is yours. You heard our elder talk about that earlier. And remember, the center of power doesn't always come from the outside. Michelle's active land acknowledgement tells us that. And so be humble and remember these origin stories of where we came from and where we want to go together in a different way. And without further ado, this is my transition slide. This is me trying to be funny. How do we put, next slide. So how do we put how do we transfer from logic to logic in our academic partnerships with Native communities? This is Earth Partnerships. Time to shine and share your slides. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikki. That was great. So Earth Partnership Indigenous Arts and Sciences is one example of many excellent tribal university partnerships. So a little bit humbled to share all this. Jessie Conaway and I will share with you a little bit about our program, processes and practices, working towards an authentic and equitable collaborations, cultural connections, social justice, and environmental science. Changing the dynamics in tribal university school relationships takes time, humility, reflection, and honest communication. IS continues to evolve and grow, and we're always learning. While acknowledging that each partner brings unique histories, languages, and assets specific to community and place, there are common themes, especially a pattern of core values that include relationships, reciprocity, respect, and responsibility, which guide our shared work. With a commitment to these values, collaborations can mutually benefit our youth and the environment. A combination of place-based Indigenous scientific knowledge and Western STEM practices within a framework of ecological restoration serves as a foundation of culturally relevant learning experiences and career exploration in the context of land and water health and stewardship. We've jointly developed a three-dimensional approach, as you can see in this slide, for connecting STEM to native science, which includes a team teaching approach to professional development, year-round programming for youth, and intergenerational engagement, bringing families, parents, and teachers together to further support student learning and experiences. Next slide, please, Maria. We've worked for many years developing our partnerships and have a long commitment to the communities we work with. We began collaborating with Bad River and Red Cliff Nations in 2011, then expanded to include Lac du Flambeau and Ho-Chunk Nations with an NSF project for connecting STEM to native science, or as our advisor, Robin Wall-Kimmerer, calls the process of indigenizing science learning. We are very grateful and fortunate for the feedback and guidance from our IS advisors, including Dr. Patty Lowe, hi Patty, Dr. Megan Bang, Running Horse Livingston, and David O'Connor. As you heard from Nikki, I'm going to share a little bit about our initiatives. As you heard from Nikki, we are currently co-developing a comprehensive model of indigenized science education that places our tribal partners as leading agents of culturally responsive science education and research that supports relationships between tribal knowledge keepers and local schools, tribal colleges, and universities in order to improve Native youth experiences in science learning. With funding from the UW-Madison School of Education, an urban Indigenous Arts and Sciences model is currently being piloted in Madison to improve teachers' capacity to teach to Wisconsin American Indian Studies Act 31 requirements in accurate and authentic ways. This initiative uses the IAS model to ground learning in place-based context in an urban intertribal context with a particular emphasis on Ho-Chunk culture and community. And thank you, Michelle Cloud, for working so closely with us on this initiative. So new this fall, we were just recently awarded a USDA New Beginnings for Native Students grant in collaboration with the Lakutares Ojibwe Community College and the College of Menominee Nation to employ a collaborative approach between tribal, university, and K-12 partners. This is the first significant collaboration among the three land grant institutions to broadly coordinate systemic efforts to support Native education across tribal and public education systems. This project will provide culturally relevant pre-college experiences emphasizing experiential learning, culturally congruent K-12 educational or professional development, course alignment for transfer students, and interinstitutional collaboration and organization to raise awareness and utilization of resources, services, and other supports for Native pre-college and college students. Thank you for taking the time listening to our program initiatives and partnerships. Next, Jessie Conaway will share about our key strategies for successful partnerships and capacity building for research within the tribal nations.
Hello, can you hear me? Audio check. Yes, you can be heard.
Excellent. So hello, everybody. Dr. Jessie Conaway beaming in from Mount Horeb, Wisconsin. It's good to be with you. I want to introduce myself. I am Scots-Irish from the East Coast. I've been living in Wisconsin for about 25 years and working with tribal people here since the mid-90s. I'm also an advisee of Patty Lowe, Dr. Lowe. Good to be with you today. And Dr. Bowman and I graduated at the same time, so it's really exciting to be involved on this project together. Miigwech to Mr. Lafreniere for getting us off to a good start. Also want to commend briefly the EP team, Earth Partnership team, for this work. It's really exciting to be a part of this, and thanks to each of you for your work in making this happen. So I serve in two roles on campus. I'm with the Nelson Institute as faculty associate for Native Nations Partnerships. And then I also work with Earth Partnership as a lead researcher and an outreach specialist. And so I was invited today to share our work connecting STEM to Native science. This is an NSF funded project that's been introduced to you already. And so I'm going to share a little bit about our process, our research process for this project, which has really been our strengths. And so focusing here on decolonization, relationship building, and affirming tribal sovereignty. So as researchers and educators, how do we do that? So looking at a co-design process for research and projects, beginning at the start of the project. So beginning with grant writing, beginning with developing a research plan. We're in dialogue and consultation with our tribal partners at the when the seed is first planted. So again, beginning with those dialogues to understand perspectives and goals of each nation that we work with. We have with these dialogues, this is about listening. So Dr. Bowman talked about this. As academics, we're not always encouraged to shut up and listen. This is the skill that's needed here. And, I want to give a shout out to Patty Lowe, who taught me when I was a doctoral student working with Bad River Ojibwa. Patty Lowe taught me, bring your skills, not your agenda, to the table. And so that's been a guiding one for me in terms of this listening piece. And then it comes to sharing power. This is decolonizing, relationship building, and affirming sovereignty. So we're sharing power. So establishing co-principal investigators in each of the nations that we work with to share that power. Also having other crucial points of contact and expertise within the nations, and also local coordinators that we employ through our grants in each of the nations that we work with. The communications piece is huge. This is one of the things that I think that we're good at, and I think it has strengthened our work together with the nations. We do monthly conference calls with our project teams and our co-principal investigators. We do annual visits and meetings. And this communications piece is relationship building, and it also improves our accountability. So again, this the goal being to move toward decolonizing dysfunctional relationships between tribes and universities, to look toward moving toward respectful and effective dynamics, relationships, and research projects. Next slide, please, Maria. Thank you so much. So honing in on the research process piece. Our current work is focused on capacity building for research within the nations and kind of looking at some of the stepping stones on that path with this capacity building piece. Our overarching goal is bringing tribal and university expertise together at the table as partners and working toward tribally driven and tribally informed outcomes. So looking at durable local outcomes for tribal nations. It's a two-way educational exchange. It's building capacity within nations, but it's also educating our own, ourselves and our project team as we go. But also, with this webinar today, educating our university colleagues and sharing, good ways to do this work. So it's an ongoing educational exchange. So some of these stepping stones, looking at following tribal protocols for grants and research approvals. So we work with tribal leadership to go through these approval processes. So depending on the nation, that'll be tribal councils, tribal legislatures, or also some tribes have their own sovereign institutional review boards. So we're working kind of across the board with those, and that's been an educational process. Looking at extending this co-design, this commitment to co-design. We have, through our Connecting STEM to Native Science project, we've been in constant feedback loops with the tribes that we work with as we develop our research plan and our instruments in terms of surveys for youth and educators, and also interview questions. So those were all of those instruments were co-developed with the tribes that we are working on. We also employ Indigenous research methods that are informed by people like Nikki and Dr. Patty Lowe, looking at just a couple brief examples. Indigenous methods such as honoring elder epistemology, honoring oral traditions, focusing on narrative interviews and focus groups, also doing intergenerational work that gathers and leverages the perspectives of multiple generations. So, leveraging that Indigenous wisdom and process in terms of the research methods. Data collection needs flexible timelines. So that's something to be aware of, working in other time frameworks, Indian time, and being flexible and respectful of that. I talked about the feedback loops already. Those are, again, relationship building and accountability building. This is really employing and culturally responsive research to continue to loop back with research partners, participants, and community members, to make sure we're on a good track. So that's being culturally responsive. Some of the methods we use are member checking for quotes before publication, and also involving the community in presentations of findings from our project. And then finally, co-authoring a commitment to sharing that power of publication, so and dissemination. So co-authoring journals and also presentations and sharing the work at conferences. Finally, my last point, please take note of this website at the bottom of the slide. This is a new and improved researcher resource page within the Native Nations UW website. So take note of that and please visit that to see some of the work that other universities throughout the US and Canada are doing in terms of partnering with tribes in a culturally responsive way. And so thank you. Nikki, passing the mic back to you.
Thanks, Jesse. That was very thorough, and I know we're pushing through here. We will have time for questions that were sent in advance, and any that come in the chat. We'll work our way through most of them. And the ones we don't, we'll put on a list and we'll respond to them and post the Q&A after the webinar. This is an important model. Nan-Wapahania, we were part of a all Indigenous, and I guess there were 2 non-Indigenous for the Canadian Evaluation Society, and the Canadian Journal of Program Evaluation, gives decolonized access. That's code for free access, and her full paper is in here. But this is a great model to help you sort of self-reflect. It's very practical and straightforward. If you're in the bottom left corner, that's most of the time where Western is. Western is deciding, Western is imposing, Western is driving it. There's harm, there's trauma. It doesn't fit well culturally or from a community standpoint. If you're in the upper right-hand corner, you can see that you were invited there, that the tribal community or tribal nation gets to decide. There are good results that are going to last. This is where the fertile soil is in the upper right-hand corner, where sustainable relationships are. So I ask you, even if you do this once a year, is write the date, write today's date on there, Indigenous Day. Today is your day, people. Where is your X today? And then as each year goes by, put another X on there so you can see your own growth. Be sovereign and in charge of your own growth. We have an article for this that will be shared afterwards, posted on the website. I think it was sent out in advance. Next slide, please. I'm sure somebody will clear me up on what was sent out in advance and what's being posted afterwards, because I may be talking out of both sides of my mouth, but we'll make sure you get it. As we think about the Northern Door and wrapping up here, what are our needs right now? These are the words of our tribal nations that we have been working since January 2020, and that Earth Partnership has been working with for decades. We need consultation, listening, and consensus. We need honoring tribal culture and tribes playing significant roles in approaching research initiatives. I would say evaluation, policy, programming, fill in the blank. Use of tribal IRBs, ordinances, and other protocols. And remembering there are formal and there are informal. And if you spent time in community with tribes in authentic and reciprocal and respectful ways, you would know that there are both formal and informal. Both are needed. Respects tribes' various approaches to IRBs. Sovereignty and the nation's wishes are to be respected and included. Every tribe is different. So think of it as a different, I don't know if case study is right, but our education IRB has one way to do things. The science IRB does similar, but a little bit different. Our tribes are all different. Some tribal IRBs sit within the tribal nation itself, like the Menominee Language and Culture Commission. Menominee also has the College of Menominee Nation, and they have their own IRB, 2 separate ones, depending on where you're doing the work. You also may get asked to go see the tribal health clinic if you're doing health research. So there are lots of different ways. You might have to go see the tribal ed board if you're doing education research. So there are lots of different levels to this, and it's just, don't be overwhelmed by it. Just be open to it. It's going to be something new, and if you are a good, trusted person, tribes will stay with you. We have to do right by the tribes. We cannot be creating more harm and trauma. We have to find ways to learn those origin stories, to honor what's going on right now as well, and then move forward together differently. Sometimes that means a no. So don't be offended. I know that academia in some places are used to having all of their research or other requests honored. You shouldn't assume that. Next slide, please. This is a quick nation-to-nation model. And if you look at the circles on the bottom left, because tribes are sovereign nations, and I would also put in, if it's, let's say it's Indian Community School, or let's say it's First Nations Development Institute, a Native nonprofit, or Native Americans in Philanthropy, whatever the organization is that you're working with, but especially tribes because they're sovereign. How do we see them as their own bubble? And then the funder, it could be a public or international government agency is another bubble. A funder could be a third bubble. For this model, I have the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. There are international guidelines if you don't have your own guidelines, and tribes have their guidelines as well. So you can sort of start to get to know the lay of the land. If you talk an UNDRIP and that we want to honor this, or what is there for your tribes, all you have to do is be a good human being before you do your human doing stuff, and do it together. And then the big circle is when you go into the tribes. When I go in, this is the way that I try to work with tribes. What are the traditional protocols in the East? And in the South, what are the treaty rights? Is there oral history? Are there traditional agreements? In the West, what is the modern day tribal constitution, ordinances, and policies? And in the North, there might be community and family or social practices that go on that may not be completely traditional and in the lodge, and then not be completely ensconced in tribal constitution or tribal treaties. They're just the way we do things around here. And you can't know that unless you have lived experience. And I know that it's hard right now with where we are at with this pandemic. The next slide is just the last one before we get to questions. How do we go beyond footnotes and frontal lobes? How do we have a transformative and metacognitive, metaphysical outside of the body and the mind? How do we use all of that to have a full experience? I hope today that you felt I was speaking to both your spirit and your intellect and your heart. We're so lucky that you're here wanting to work with us in a new and different way. That's the way it's been branded, and that's the way it will continue. We want research and evaluation someday to be used as medicine, and we need to teach more people how to do that. And I hope you're our people. We want you to be our people. Traditional knowledge is centered in our contemporary work, but it's only for those who have the responsibility to do that. So if that model that you saw or some of the things you heard, our non-native partners are doing that with tribes and with traditional tribal people. That's how that's done. You don't get to take things and say, hey, I know how to do this now. It's not the way it works. Remembering we don't own knowledge, we're caretakers of it and caretakers of each other. What we do now, maybe in 7 generations from now, will be so much more advanced that we won't have to have sort of 101 conversations. But I fully recognize, as somebody who's gone through pre-kindergarten through PhD, that hardly any of this exists in our curriculums, our syllabi, or in our professional development offerings. So a big thanks to Spencer for valuing this work, and to my colleagues over the years, Earth Partners, as well as the colleagues who've been around me, just helping to continue this work forward. And remembering ownership of cultural and intellectual property rights and human subjects, it matters in a Western context. It also matters in an Indigenous context, and ask them, how do you want to do this? How should we do this? And if something doesn't exist, that's your reciprocal gift back. That's the way you give back. When I wrote my PhD, we didn't have those protocols, but we sort of learned while doing. You're sort of building the plane as you're flying it. That's what happens. And so it's both direct service and original research and technical assistance all braided up into one big thing. So with that, I'll stop, and I think we have some questions, right?
Hi, this is Rachel Byington. Thank you for the presentations, Nikki, Cheryl, and Jesse, and from Michelle and Richard Lafernier. We do have some questions here, and so I'm going to ask 2 questions from 2 participants because they're somewhat similar. From Max, we have, can someone say more about the previous September 22nd session about the Ho-Chunk IRB? And then, is there a good resource for how to find out what a tribe's IRB process is?
I'm not Ho-Chunk, so I'm going to pass the mic to any of my Ho-Chunk relatives.
I think that um, this is Michelle Cloud. What was the question again? I'm sorry.
So the question is, can someone say something about the September 22nd session about the Ho-Chunk IRB?
Well, I want to say that Dr. Marcus Lewis did an excellent job of sharing just what the Ho-Chunk Nation has gone through to get where they're at with regard to IRB. I think that one of the things that really stood out for me is the fact that because the Ho-Chunk Nation is a sovereign nation, as Dr. Bowman was talking about sovereignty there, that it is, the IRB is exactly what the nation wants it to be. Now, I know that universities have IRBs and there's a commonality between those, but it was nice to hear about specifically what the nation does and how they have autonomy to make those decisions with regard to research and evaluation.
Thank you. And then the second part, or a second question that was related is there a good resource for how to find out what a tribe's IRB process is? Or I guess, what would you recommend for finding out if a tribe even has an IRB?
This is Nikki. I'll try to put a couple links. Can folks see the chat box? I'll try to put a couple links in, but the first of all, each tribe has a different IRB. So which one do you want? That would be the first consideration. The second thing would be there are documents out there from National Congress of American Indians Policy Research Center and from, I am trying to think out west. Dr. Dodge Francis, I know you know this, who are setting up your own tribal IRB. You could read that handbook and you sort of get an idea of what that is, but I think some tribes don't call them IRBs, so they might go, what's an IRB? But every IRB is different. But if this is, these are good topics that if we don't answer all of your questions, I would strongly encourage you, please fill out the evaluation form, because these are topics that we can go into in depth further when we have our follow-up webinars, which will also have breakout groups and discussion elements, so we can actually all be talking, you know what I'm saying? I mean, if there's 700 of you, we actually might have a problem, a good problem, but those are other things. Does anyone else, Aaron or Jesse, does anyone else have anything to add to that? I'm going to try to look up a link quick.
So Carolee Dodge Francis writes that some tribes use Indian Health Service as an IRB component, especially when it relates to health. Thank you, Carolee, Dr. Francis, for adding that in.
Hi, this is Jessie. Thank you for your question. That website that I shared with the researcher resources, and I'll put a link to it in the chat. There are a couple resources there that talk about tribal IRBs. One is from the National Congress of American Indians. And then there's also the Research Protection Act that talks about tribal research governance. So those are some other resources that are created by credible institutions that can be good resources for looking into these tribal IRB questions. I'll share that. I'll share the link to that page.
I shared 3 links in there, so hopefully everyone can see. And these are 3 documents that we can have saved and posted, you know, as well.
Hello, this is Michelle Cloud again. I just want to kind of briefly mention with regard to that question on IHS, or Indian Health Services, that Dr. Marcus Lewis had mentioned that the Ho-Chunk Nation's IRB includes a wide variety of professionals that would take the lead on those kinds of research and evaluation questions. So that's a good suggestion to have. Thank you.
I can move on to the next question if we're ready.
Yep.
Okay, the next question is, could you describe what sovereignty affirming research is?
Do any of our sovereign nations want to respond to that? What I just demonstrated to all of you is just a way to be academically and culturally humble. And so I always defer to the tribes. And so sovereignty affirming research would be whatever the tribe defines as important research for them to be doing. That's the simplest answer that I can give you.
Thank you. We have a question from Lucretia Fairchild from UW-Madison Human Development and Family Studies. Do you have suggestions for first steps in reaching out to tribes? There might be some products from my research that could be useful to tribes, and I would like to find out if and how it might be useful or not.
I mean, any of the tribes, please chime in. This is a full panel of professionals you have here. I mean, there are a lot of documents and toolkits and resources and things out there on how to reach out to tribes. I mean, those are things you can Google, but also make sure that they come from Native American reputable resources. I know that UW-Madison has one through Dr. Sherry Johnson and Wisconsin Population Health Study, and how to do tribal outreach when you're doing PRAMs, the pregnancy research that their organization does. And I believe, I don't know if Dr. Johnson can type in or if she's even on here, anyone from her team, but those are things you can type in. That's fresh and was made in and completed in spring or early summer of 2020. But it's, when I reach out to tribes, I say who I am, where I'm from. I tell them what I hope we can work together on, and then I usually ask them, are there things that they are working on that sort of fit into that, or ways that I could help them? But it's sort of, there's not really one blanket answer. It kind of depends on what project you're working on, but a lot of this goes back to the Eastern Door. You build good relations. How can you be part of the community and not be a helicopter researcher? How do you have continued and ongoing relationships? You heard in the Western Door, our Earth Partners folks have been working with our tribal communities here for decades, you know, and that you just build and build and build and build, and you keep, it's like working on any relationship. This is just a professional and academic one. And so making sure that there are adequate resources, time, folks aren't rushed, asking questions, how may we help you? We are working on this. Is this something your tribe would be interested in? We have support for you to do that. You would be, you know, you can talk about who's in charge of data. I mean, it depends on when you're interfacing with the tribe, what part are you working on with them? To write a grant, to actually do a study, what's going to be in it long-term for them? Things before you even approach the tribe, though, is that you need to read these documents that we're putting in, that we've shared with you earlier, that we're putting in the chat, that we'll be posting later, so that we don't have to have a 101, because you don't want to step in your own, you know, you don't want to step in your own stuff, and you don't want to bring that stuff to tribal people or tribal nations. So you got to do your homework first, you know.
Thank you. And
This
thank
is-
you
Oh, sorry. This is Michelle again, just briefly. I want to say thank you to Dr. Bowman for that. And that's really was my answer with regard to the question. And that is relationship building. It's nice to know who you're dealing with before you approach them. And I encourage each one of you to do your homework on the Native nations that are in your area and maybe do some, looking through the internet for some of those, some of that information. With regard to the sovereignty affirming research question, good question. I think that with Dr. Marcus Lewis's presentation on the Ho-Chunk Nation IRB, that when he talked about cultural information and cultural research, that answer is always going to be in the negative for our IRB. There are some things that are not to be shared that we keep very close to our vest. So I would encourage you to start building those relationships so that you can understand what the answer may be to your questions. So thank you.
Thank you. And I was just want to thank everyone for the questions that are coming in. We will not be able to get to all of them as we are getting close to the end of our presentation, but as Dr. Bowman mentioned, we will keep track of all these questions so that they can be addressed at some other point. I'm going to go into the next question and see if we can get one or two more questions in. What ideas do you have for decolonizing / indigenizing UW-Madison? I think about more Ho-Chunk students and faculty to campus, but at the same time wonder if that is a colonial / appropriative approach.
Aaron, are you going to try to answer that, or are you going to have me?
If you can get it started, I can follow you.
Well, I'm going to give you my general approach because I don't do formal recruitment. What I do is probably informal recruitment. I try to be happy, positive, enthusiastic. I try to work with Native students and families to say, these are safe places and these are safe people on campus. Sometimes I do it publicly and sometimes I have to do it on the down low. In terms of how would you recruit more? We need a more representation. One of the articles that I sent to you was about our visibility. We don't have visibility. We need visibility. We need decision-making power. If UW, I'm going to go out there since this is the vision and the dream. If UW systems wanted to do a memorandum of agreement with every one of our tribes, and however that is done, I don't know what's in the hopper. That's why we have Aaron here. That would be something great, that could be done. But we have to have representation at a high level. We have to have high visibility, high level decision makers that are just braided and blended right in with everybody else, not as a pullout or a set aside, just as part of the culture. And if there's any other, I don't know, I'll be quiet there and let Aaron go because he's much more experienced and knowledgeable on this topic.
So just to be sure, it's kind of on recruitment of Indigenous people to the Academy, both as kind of at all levels, or is it students again? Can you remind me?
The question is asking specifically about Ho-Chunk students, but I would imagine that it applies to all Native students.
Yeah. In higher education research kind of shows that if you could only do one activity, if you could only do one thing to improve the rate of historically underrepresented students attending higher education, is you'd hire more underrepresented faculty. So one of the most important things we can do is hire Indigenous faculty as an institution. And UW-Madison currently has at least 13 tenure track Indigenous faculty and has hired at least 5 Indigenous faculty in the last 3 years. So UW-Madison is really following this kind of idea of how important Indigenous faculty are on the recruitment and retention of Native American students to an institution, including Ho-Chunk. We do have 1 Ho-Chunk faculty on campus in the School of Education. So that's one core piece, but obviously, you know, the most important piece is having an institution that reflects the cultural knowledge of the Ho-Chunk people, that reflects the ease of connecting with Indigenous peers, that we offer culturally relevant events on campus. And importantly, we see Indigenous knowledge in the curriculum offered within the courses. So I think those four really major kind of areas of interest of in the classroom, Indigenous knowledge in the classroom, and we see that through first-year interest groups and other courses on campus like American Indian Studies or history courses that, you know, focus on Native American history. You know, we do our best to try to connect Indigenous peers to each other when they join campus through sharing information via email or other kind of groups. And then lastly, we you know, do our best to offer culturally relevant events like an annual powwow or elders and residents or other programs for Indigenous students. And I think those are important stuff. But making personal relationships with the Ho-Chunk Nation, the education department, and future students, those early connections really help.
Thank you. I'm going to ask this last question, and so that we can move toward wrapping up. The question is, at what level within the university is best to engage with Native nations, Indigenous people? Is it PI, department, college, university? And where must the structures and relationships be built to result in sustainability and trust?
Is that directed at the panel? Because I think Erin was doing a great job.
It's not addressed to anybody specifically.
Okay.
Yeah, you know, trust is so important. And it kind of comes back to that piece that I heard earlier about how important relationships are in conducting research with Indigenous people and Indigenous nations. And so I think that sense of reciprocity, that tribal nations are benefiting equally from the research in some way, that historically, you know, research has been very extractive with Indigenous nations, and that Indigenous nations have often not even learned of the outcomes of the research studies. And so I think it's this deep kind of historical issue of Indigenous peoples feeling that their tribal knowledge is being extracted for the benefit of others and not for the mutual kind of benefit of the tribal nation or tribal community itself. That's just really an important concept to remember. We've had so many different issues where well-meaning and intentioned researchers come in, have done harm, or researchers have come in ways that have really offended tribal nations in some ways. And so I think it's just really important to establish those relationships early. You're going to have to budget time to establish relationships because they take time to build with Indigenous nations. It's because Indigenous nations and communities today are asked by so many different institutions for collaboration. How can they tell which one of these partners is going to be a really good partner who follows tribally established protocols for doing research in that tribal nation versus others who are just going to kind of do their own method and maybe not communicate completely and transparently with Native nations. So once again, the relationships are just the most fundamental piece, and it's a little more challenging to establish those relationships right now in the pandemic, but they can be done.
Wonderful. Well,
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
yeah. Thank you, Nikki. Now I just would like to welcome back Aaron, the Director of Tribal Relations in the Chancellor's Office, who will give us some closing remarks. And I just personally want to thank Aaron. It's been a long time in coming, and he's been a big supporter of the Earth Partnership Program. So thank you. Thank you for everything you've done, and look forward to working with you. Go ahead, Aaron.
Hana Chada Haipi, Aaron Birdbetter Ga Hini Gaide. I just said in what little I've learned, but I'm excited to learn the Ho-Chunk Nation language, the language of the Ho-Chunk. And I just said, hello, it's nice to be here in the Ho-Chunk language. And my role in tribal relations is a brand new position at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And there are about 24 universities now with tribal relations or tribal liaison positions. And the goal is just to think about clear communication for partnering with Native nations. In regards to this particular webinar, I'm talking about how research impacts relationships, and research can deeply impact relationships between universities and tribal communities, tribal nations. if we don't honor the kind of research processes and the protocols that the tribes themselves have set up for conducting research with their communities. Anyone from UW-Madison who reaches out in the future, if one of us doesn't fully honor the protocols that they have, or we are not good stewards of the information they share with us, then it harms all future research relationships. And I'll read this quote that we received when we asked about our research relationships with tribal nations as a university community at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And here's the reply we received. And it's just a really important reply from one of our tribal partners here in the state. It says, "We have been researched to death. The relationships have been rocky at best. There are many scholars at UW-Madison who want to do research here, but we're not interested. The researchers don't understand the relationship, the researchers don't understand the importance of developing relationships first. We often see no benefit from the research and may not even be informed of the results. It seems completely one-sided. Survey has become a dirty word to us." And so it's just an important reminder about respecting tribal ways of being, respecting Indigenous knowledge, thinking about how one can connect to tribal communities and the time that it takes to connect to tribal communities. It takes time. And I hope that everyone thinks deeply about investing that time to make positive relationships. Indigenous people are definitely interested in research. There's a need for research, but once again, it needs to be conducted in ways that respect the ways of being of tribal nations and their own kind of internal protocols for conducting research for them, which includes stewardship of information, of keeping sensitive cultural information safe, that not all of their cultural information might be appropriate to share outside of kind of private meetings with tribal peoples. So tribal communities are really wanting to make safe, authentic relationships with universities. There's mutual benefit for both parties with Indigenous knowledge applying to some of the great challenges we face as a human species, such as climate change. But Indigenous people want to feel that researchers care deeply about them as in people and not just subjects to mine data from. And I just kind of think about Arizona State University conducting genetic research about 20 years ago now, maybe about 15 years ago now, an incredible harm that happened to all genetic research because that particular relationship, harvesting Indigenous genetic data, was shared without the permission of the Native Nation to other researchers, and it really harmed kind of genetic research going forward. Just a really important reminder to honor tribal protocols for research. Tribes are interested in collaborating, but there's been a history of challenging collaborations that we need to overcome. But by being good listeners, by really trying to form personal and long-lasting relationships with tribal nations, we can accomplish mutually beneficial research that will not only aid our own need and challenges as a human species, but also advance the needs of tribal nations. So I'm so thankful for everyone who came and is interested in conducting research with tribal nations. It's definitely possible. It just takes a little bit of forethought and a lot of investment in relationship building. So thank you to all who came to this particular webinar today, and I wish everyone a happy Indigenous Peoples Day.
Thank you, Erin, for your good words. Deeply appreciate everyone's participation today, and especially to Nikki for sharing her knowledge and expertise, and Michelle and Erin for sharing during the question and answer. I hope this webinar motivated efforts and inspired ideas for forming equitable and respectful relationships with tribal communities. With an attitude of commitment, we will change policies and we will change practices. So stay strong and stay safe, and please fill out the evaluation. We look forward to learning about your feedback and also thinking about what we would offer for future webinars and in this relationship building effort.